Tell me a little bit about your organization and actually why you're here at CPAC.
Okay, so the Coalition for Jewish Values was formed because we were so distraught at seeing this one-sided representation of how the Jewish community feels on these questions, including things like calling President Trump an anti-Semite, which we found tremendously offensive.
I find it astounding. I mean, I don't know how you can make the case,
It's off the chart crazy, and I introduce to Jewish audiences, I say, okay, do you think that President Trump is an anti-Semite, but Ilhan Omar is not? And obviously there's people who are not observant, but who understand the difference and who understand what values look like and understand that progressivism is actually not the future, progressivism is the past. Okay,
wait, tell me, what do you mean by that? I'm not even sure I understand that. How is progressivism the past and not the future?
Well, let's go back to the Romans and the Greeks and the idea that a baby should be left to die. The Greeks did that. Greek general writes back to his wife, if it's a boy, raise him for me. If it's a girl, expose it. Leave it to die. On homosexuality, actually, the Talmud records a praise of the Romans, that even though they would have these relationships and set aside, they would designate a particular man to be with, they wouldn't write a marriage document for them. So the idea that there was such a thing as a gay marriage was something they talked about and said, oh wow, the Romans are great, they don't do that. So many of these progressive ideas are really not about the future, but about a regression to the pre-biblical values.
Fascinating. Any others you can think of off the top of your head? I'm curious. Very curious.
Well,
I've just never heard this before.
For sure, euthanasia or, leaving the elderly to die is not a new concept.
Right.
Leaving the infirm to die is not, or aborting the infirm is not a new concept.
Right.
I do not recall any discussion from 2,000 years ago about transgender. I don't know why. Without modern day surgery, you can't do that. But I'm sure that,
Very interesting. Very interesting. Tell me about the Coalition for Jewish Values.
So the Coalition for Jewish Values, like I said, was formed about 2 years ago. And we already have the backing of 1,000 rabbis because, like I said, the traditional community, there are scores, if not thousands and thousands of rabbis who back our opinions who don't even know who we are yet because we're so new.
I see.
We're just kind of getting out there.
So part of the reason you're here at CPAC is to let people know and How many Jews are at CPAC? Any idea? Is there any?
There's actually a program across the street called Shabbat at CPAC.
Oh, actually, you know what? Someone has invited me to shul. Actually, that was interesting.
To go see what Shabbat at CPAC looks like.
Yeah.
I think there's about 200 observant or interested Jews showing up at Shabbat at CPAC. So that tells you something.
That says a lot, actually. Very interesting.
Yeah, look, my joke is that there really are Jews who are pro-life and pro-family and pro-tradition and pro-religious liberty, and we represent all five of us. But as I said, really it's thousands and thousands of rabbis, much less lay people who are not personally observant or Orthodox, whatever you want to call it. We joke that we're not really, Orthodox is a name the Reform call those who are traditionally observant. We ourselves are pre-denominational, which works in the Jewish community because there's so many Jews running around calling themselves post-denominational, which is to say they're basically so ultra-liberal they can't find any synagogue that they're interested in.
Got it.
So listen, we're pre-denominational. We're the original.
Okay. I was thinking, tell me about the current presidency. We were joking earlier about how it's audacious and ridiculous to call the president anti-Semitic. Tell me a little bit about, what you think about the presidency and this administration and how it's approached the Jewish people.
Well, I wrote an article called "The Philo Semitic President,"
Philo-Semitic
president.
I don't know what that means.
Almost 2 years ago.
Okay.
A bibliophile is a person who loves
okay,
books.
I got it. Yeah, Philo-Semitic.
He's
yes,
not anti-Semitic, he's Philo-Semitic.
I got it. Okay.
And I think that's a much more accurate characterization of President Trump. I mean, after all, look, it's not just that he has an observant Jewish son, it's how close he is to him, how Jared Kushner is one of his close advisors, besides how much he enjoys his Jewish grandchildren, etc. But besides Jared Kushner, Jason Dove Greenblatt is observant, David Friedman is observant.
Right, of course.
And, long before politics or anything, Donald Trump had his limousine driver fight a snowstorm for 3 hours to get across New York to go visit David Friedman when he was mourning the loss of his father or mother. I don't remember which one it was. But that's a personal story of affinity and respect.
Right.
So this is not a president who, on any issue, have we had grounds to say, oh, okay, we understand why they're saying it's anti-Semitic. We don't get it at all. There's just nothing there. What he said about Charlottesville, that there's hatred and bigotry on both sides, congratulations, there was hatred and bigotry on both sides.
Well, okay, so unpackage that for me. That's actually a very common thing I hear from people saying, look, this is proof of racism.
Since when does calling out hatred and bigotry wherever it exists qualify as racism? I mean, are we claiming here that Antifa is not hateful? That Antifa is not bigoted? It's not shutting down speakers they don't like? Which is a tactic of the Nazi stormtroopers from the 1930s. I mean, shut down a Jewish event and Antifa is there. And yes, thank you very much. That's what anti-Semitism looks like. And we see it on college campuses today, coming from the left. As far as the right, the president was certainly under the impression that there were people there who, whether they were not marching necessarily, they were just opposed to the idea of removing a Confederate statue.
There were certainly those people there.
Yeah, there are people who don't want those statues removed. And so he said there were fine people on both sides. Oh, that means the president said the Nazis are fine people. Can you read English? Did he not say the precise opposite? It's like I said, it's crazy. They're looking for talking points. They're not looking for the reality of the situation.
Fascinating. It's a new take. I've certainly thought about the fact that there were just simply people that, quite a few people that were actually just opposed to removal of the monuments, but I hadn't thought about the other side that you mentioned
The
just
ultimate
now.
monument to bigotry and hatred would be the Arch of Titus in Rome.
Okay.
What does the Arch of Titus depict? The Roman soldiers plundering the Jews' holy temple, taking away all their sacred vessels and then destroying the thing. So it's the ultimate monument to hatred. And we say, don't tear it down. The Roman Empire is gone. We're still here. We want that history on display.
Fascinating.
I don't know. The African American community could approach it exactly the same way. Oh yeah, look at the racists who used to exist in society, and look where we are today. Yeah. It's a pity that we're not looking at things that way.
Interesting. Oh, you're offering a number of challenging perspectives here, Yaakov.
I like to reframe things. I say the similar things about pro-life and the abortion debate.
Okay, tell me.
Go on. Because the left has managed to peg the idea that if you're pro-life, you believe that termination of pregnancy should never happen under any circumstances, even if both mother and child will die as a result of our inaction. Just let nature take its course. Well, the overwhelming majority of Americans would not believe that, would not agree with that.
Of course.
But if you look at what's actually being debated in the legislature, it's a completely different picture. I have not seen a pro-life piece of legislation that did not include a carve-out. A carve-out for the life of the mother, a carve-out for rape or incest, usually all three. And that's an entirely different debate.
But these days we're talking about, abortion at term and things like that, right?
Which is, if you would ask the overwhelming majority of Americans, it's absolute insanity. There's no way that they would support that if the debate were framed accurately. In terms of what is actually being debated, the idea that the Senate could not manage to pass a bill that would prohibit a doctor from leaving an abortion survivor to die on the table. They're not allowed. The only thing that sent Dr. Gosnell to prison is the fact that he actually physically killed the baby. If he simply didn't provide it with food, if they didn't nurse the baby, they didn't give it formula, they didn't help it survive and just let it die, much less supplemental oxygen, that's okay. Under current law, that's okay.
From what I'm hearing from you, basically, is you feel the biggest issue is a messaging. It's like a marketing issue almost, or a messaging issue.
On an issue
the
like that,
conservative
it absolutely is.
Yeah.
Because if you ask, even millennials apparently are surprisingly conservative. If you ask them, do you believe that parents should be entitled to have an abortion because they just found out the child's going to have Down syndrome? The way we look at disability today has changed so much for the better that they're saying, no, that's horrible. Why would you want to terminate a pregnancy just because the child's going to have Down syndrome? By the way, as far as happiness goes, Down syndrome children grow up to be happier adults than the rest of us, on average. So, why? Oh, because their utility is not enough. Because it's too hard. It's horrible what we talk about.
It doesn't sound terribly fair to make the decision for the person, right?
It's just astounding. And what Roe v. Wade actually says is that a mother should treat having an abortion with all the same severity and gravitas of having a nose job. And that's not something the average American will agree with at all. Absolutely. What New York just passed is removing abortion as a crime, so that if a man runs up to a pregnant woman to deliberately stab and murder the baby,
which
actually happened, that they cannot prosecute the murder of the child. It's no different than attacking anybody else by stabbing them in the stomach. They're supposed to be all about protected classes and protected groups, and they just stripped away all protection from an expectant mother. And they did so claiming to be talking in the name of human rights, where it's obviously a messaging problem.
Well, so how do you account for this, schizophrenia, or something? Is that a good word? I mean, on the left, that's what I hear you telling me here.
I feel that the left has just abandoned values from all sorts of angles. And watching the left turn against Israel is all, at least according to our understanding of anti-Semitism or hatred. I mean, obviously that was a euphemism. They don't hate us because of our ethnicity. The 99% of Semites are not Jews. So it was a euphemism for Jew hatred. It's not about their religion, it's about their ethnicity. Today, it's not about their ethnicity, it's about their country. But we're always going to find a new way to justify hating Judaism. It's all about traditional values. The left is against traditional values and the left's against Israel. I don't think that's coincidental. I think that's just an across-the-board rejection of the idea that we should have limitations in our lives, that we should have a conscience that restricts what we're allowed to do. Even when nobody's watching, we're supposed to behave a certain way.
Why do you think it took so long to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, even though it was promised for a very long time?
I think that most presidents were trying very hard to achieve this quote-unquote balance between Israel and the Arab world, and the Palestinians are not looking for any deal. And this is where I think that Donald Trump is mistaken, is the idea that the Palestinians will accept any deal that isn't a step towards the eventual destruction of Israel.
I see.
That's the deal they're looking for. And so the average, most presidents to date were waiting for some politically auspicious time when the Arab world was ready to say, okay, let's accept Israel. And President Trump said, that's not going to happen unless we show, certainly not unless we show that, the deal is going to have to involve complete recognition that Israel has a tie to Jerusalem. Nobody, no other religion has a tie to a land or a city like Judaism does. I mean, it's just not part of any other faith, even Islam with Mecca and Medina. But this idea that the Palestinians have a claim to Jerusalem. Their only claim to Jerusalem is otherwise it belongs to the Jews. Someone pointed out actually that the Arabic name for Jerusalem is Al-Quds. But Al-Quds itself is a contraction of Bet al-Maqdas, which is the Arabic for Beit HaMikdash, which in Hebrew is the Holy Temple. It's the site of the Jews' Holy Temple. Even the Arabic
it's
word,
basically, you're saying.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
it's acknowledging that there was actually a Dutch scholar in the 17th century, late 1600s, who went through the Holy Land, then called Palestine, and he said, one city after the next, he was able to find the name of that city in Jewish texts, the Talmud and the Bible, etc. And there is not a single city in Israel that started off with an Arabic name. No such thing. Someone pointed out to me something very interesting. He said there's only actually 3 cities which they renamed. Shechem, which is El Khalil, and Nablus, which is Hebron, and Jerusalem, which is Al-Quds. Those are actually the only 3 cities where there's an explicit biblical reference. And of course, the Quran reveres the Bible, just as Christians do.
Right.
And there's an explicit biblical reference to the Jews buying land in those cities as an eternal inheritance of the Jewish people.
Fascinating.
So if you don't rename it, you're acknowledging the Jews bought land in those 3 cities. I mean, Hebron, the idea that should be considered an Arab city is not only anathema to the Bible, but it's anathema to history.
Well, and I actually learned in an interview yesterday with the fellow that invited me to the shul that it's actually in the Palestinian lands, it's actually illegal for Jews to buy the land. There's this kind of racist policy.
Any land under control of the Palestinian Authority, there's actually 2 things. Number 1 is a Jew can't buy land there. It's illegal. They'll be
penalty of death.
Even in East Jerusalem, there was an American citizen who was arrested by the Palestinian Authority. I mean, he had dual citizenship.
Right.
It was an Arab American who sold land to a Jew in East Jerusalem, for which he was arrested. And it created a major diplomatic problem for the Palestinian Authority.
But talk about a racist policy, if there ever is one, right?
Understand, a Palestinian is a racist construct. You can be a Bedouin, you can be a Druze, you can be an Arab Muslim, you can be an Arab Christian. The only thing you can't be and be a Palestinian is a Jew. An 8th generation Jerusalemite is not considered a Palestinian, but an Arab whose family visited Palestine in 1942 is a Palestinian. What's the origin of the name Palestine?
Oh, that's a great question. You tell me.
Well, Palestine comes from the Greeks and the Romans. They were the ones who renamed it as part of their colonialist policy of takeover. Alexander the Great conquered Israel.
Right.
And they called the land Palestine. And the Romans, of course, called it Palestine because they wanted to get rid of all the Jews. Well, they never succeeded. There's something called the Palestinian Talmud, which is kind of thumbing their noses at the notion of Palestine, because we also call it the Jerusalem Talmud, because there were still Jews there. And when the Crusaders came in and, past history, they massacred the Jews of Israel. Even if they managed to massacre all the Jews of Hebron, within 100 years they were back. In the Middle Ages, it was called one of the 4 holy cities. So modern day Hebron, the only time what happened was in 1929, there was a massacre. The Arabs attacked the Jews. And that was not about the occupation, thank you very much. It was because they hated the Jews. And the British response was, well, we can't protect you in Hebron. We're going to ethnically cleanse the Jews out of Hebron and take them all to Jerusalem. We'll be able to protect them there. So if you're saying that Hebron is an Arab city and Israel is occupying it, you're in favor of ethnic cleansing as long as the ethnic cleansing is done of Jews.
Fascinating. Listen, thank you, Yaakov, so much for the history lesson and the conversation.
Sure.
Pleasure to have you here.